actually want to talk about something that I think is a really interesting topic that doesn't get talked about enough. And it applies to me, it applies to pretty much everyone that makes content. Very few people are not subject to this, and that is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is very important when you consider who you're watching, who you're having discussions with, and when you think about yourself when you do independent research on different topics. And Nintendo has obviously been a roundabout topic going back and forth between, like, some people have negative takes on it, some people have positive takes on it. The negative take people find evidence for their negative takes. The positive people, like myself, find evidence for the positive takes. And you just go round and round in circles. And it can be very hard for people to understand who they should believe and who they should trust. But we need to first let people know what confirmation bias is. If it's a term you've never heard of before, or it's one you haven't thought about in a long time, let's just go over to the Encyclopedia Britannica, trying to go away from your typical like Webster and just give you an idea of what confirmation bias is. It's a term in psychology. So confirmation bias is people's tendency to process information by looking for or interpreting information that is consistent with their existing beliefs. This biased approach to decision making is largely unintentional, and it results in a person ignoring information that is inconsistent with their beliefs. These beliefs can include a person's expectations in a given situation and their predictions about a particular outcome. People are especially likely to process information to support their own beliefs when an issue is highly important or self-relevant. As a background, confirmation bias is one example of how humans sometimes process information in an illogical, biased manner. The manner in which a person knows and understands the world is often affected by factors that are simply unknown to that person. Philosophers note that people have difficulty processing information in a rational and unbiased manner once they have developed an opinion about an issue. Humans are better able to rationally process information, given equal weight to multiple viewpoints, if they are emotionally distant from the issue, although a low level of confirmation bias can still occur when an individual has no vested interest. One explanation for why people are susceptible to confirmation bias is that it is an efficient way to process information. Humans are incessantly bombarded with information and cannot possibly take the time to carefully process each piece of information to form an unbiased conclusion. Human decision-making and information processing is often biased because people are limited to interpreting information from their own viewpoint. People need to process information quickly to protect themselves from harm. It is adaptive for humans to rely on instinctive, automatic behaviors that keep them out of harm's way. Another reason why people show confirmation bias is to protect their self-esteem. People like to feel good about themselves, and discovering that a belief that they highly value is incorrect makes them feel bad about themselves. Therefore, people will seek information that supports their existing beliefs. Another closely related motive is wanting to be correct. People want to feel that they are intelligent, but information that suggests that they are wrong or that they made a poor decision suggests they are lacking intelligence, and thus confirmation bias will encourage them to disregard this information. Research has shown that confirmation bias is strong and widespread, that it occurs in several contexts. In the context of decision making, once an individual makes a decision, they will look for information that supports it. Information that conflicts with a person's decision may cause discomfort, and the person will therefore ignore it or give it little consideration. People have special treatment to information that supports their personal beliefs. In studies examining my side bias, people were able to generate and remember more reasons supporting their side of a controversial issue than the opposing side. Only when a researcher directly asked people to generate arguments against their own beliefs were they able to do so. It is not that people are incapable of generating arguments that are counter to their beliefs, but rather people are not motivated to do so. Confirmation bias also surfaces in people's tendency to look for positive instances. When seeking information to support their hypothesis or expectations, people tend to look for positive evidence that confirms that a hypothesis is true rather than information that would prove it as false. Confirmation bias also operates in impression formation. If people are told what to expect from a person they are about to meet, such as the person is warm, friendly, and outgoing, and people will look for information that supports that expectation. When interacting with people whom perceive to have certain personalities, the perceivers will ask questions of those people that are biased towards supporting the perceiver's beliefs. For example, if Maria expects her roommate to be friendly and outgoing, Maria may ask her if she likes to go to parties, and then asking if she studies in the library. So confirmation bias is important because it may lead to people holding strongly to false beliefs or to give more weight to information that supports their beliefs than warranted by the evidence. Now, I think that's a pretty good spot there. We could keep going and read the rest, but I'll put a link to this down below if you want to read it. I thought it was important to read a bunch of that because if you think about a lot of the online discourse around Nintendo, both the positive and negative, I think that you can really look towards confirmation bias to essentially explain 99% of it. And it's not because there's not legit criticisms, and that's not what I'm doing here. I'm not dismissing the criticisms, okay? Criticisms are legit. And heck, the people that love things, people that are excited about Switch 2, that are enjoying it, they're also legit as well. These are legit feelings you are having, legit feelings you are expressing. But data and information doesn't care about your biases. It doesn't care about how you feel. Data and information only cares about itself. Okay, so here we have my Switch 2, and whether or not you like this system is going to be 100% subjective. What's really hard to do, though, is once you form that opinion, come up with objective arguments for one way or another, because you're not going to consider everything fairly. I've been obviously on a little bit of a tirade on Twitter and in some of my videos responding to a certain YouTuber called Nintendine, to the point that people think I'm obsessed with him. And obviously, you know, I don't agree with a lot of the things he says, so I search up for information that supports those disagreements. But the thing is that a lot of the stuff that I disagree with him about is just an opinion on if Switch 2 is not just currently successful, but will be successful moving forward. And he does a lot of this by analyzing different data points. And it's interesting because if you form a conclusion before you have all the information, you're only going to look at information that supports that conclusion. And I feel like that's a lot of what he does. And honestly, it's a lot of what all of us do. I've been asked personally if I think Switch 2 is going to be successful. Now, I jokingly made predictions over the last couple of years that this could be really big, maybe it could be bigger than Switch 2, and I kind of overhyped everything because I was just stupidly excited for the platform. But, you know, if I just sit back and think earnestly, I have no idea if Switch 2 is going to be successful. I don't know if it's going to be as big a success as Switch 1. I don't know if it can even cross 100 million. I don't know if it's going to be 75. I do think it'll probably be more than 30 million, but I don't really know, right? And the reason I don't know is because I like to process things from a very logical perspective. And I'm not saying I don't have confirmation bias and that I'm better than Nintendine or anyone else. I'm absolutely not. I'm totally guilty of confirmation bias in many different debates and arguments I've been in. But what I will say is that when it comes to talking about whether or not this system's going to sell well moving forward and the general interest in the audience, and I don't think there's any objective data to support one way or another. And when I say there isn't any, what I mean is in order for you to come to conclusions on long-term projections and conclusions on customer satisfaction, you need a lot of information. Not a little bit, not tidbits, a lot of information. Like, I'll give you an example. I know Nintendine is going to make a video probably on October 8th about the sales data for the United States. Despite the fact that Circana doesn't actually provide numbers, he's going to use it to try to extrapolate how well or not Nintendo Switch 2 is doing. And even if Switch 2 is the #1 bestseller, he'll probably find a way to twist that narrative to end up being a negative. Whereas someone like me, I might report it and I might act excited or positive about it. And in both instances, you can call that confirmation bias because I want Nintendo Switch 2 to do well, but I don't know if it will. And so one of the key things I do when I'm looking at all of these data points, and the whole reason I even watch Nintendine's videos, I can ignore his videos. They don't have to be relevant to me. But I actually like to partake in people that have differing opinions and different ways they look at things because it could maybe open my mind to this perspective that maybe things are negative. I don't like having discussions with people that just agree with me, because the problem when people just agree with me is I'm not getting new information. And so I watch his videos hoping to glean new information. And the more and more I watch, the more and more I realize that confirmation bias is crazy high. He had a recent video about stocks, and I'm not going to dive into all the particulars on it. But basically, he was trying to tell people that like the ebbs and flows of the stocks don't matter, you know, the peaks and the valleys, because it's just weekly. It changes all the time. And he kind of thinks the most recent one, though, despite that, might be a bigger sign than usual about the declining interest and belief from investors in Nintendo Switch 2, and that analysts are now out there telling people to stop buying Nintendo stock right now, changing to a neutral pattern. because, hey, it's 15. They're saying they're not going to hit the 15 million. The projections aren't saying that anymore, which is not what that analyst said. The analyst was actually talking about the other analysts. She works for Wedbush Securities. Their projection is 17 million. She's basically saying they're not going to hit 17 million. They're not going to hit the 20 million that's been projected by others. None of the comments were actually about Nintendo's internal, expectations of 15 million. That was never stated, but it was implied by him because if you apply it that way, it fits his confirmation bias that Nintendo's not going to meet their sales and sell less, right? He's looking for things to confirm his stance that Nintendo Switch 2 is going to fail in year one to meet expectations from Nintendo. He's looking for it at every turn. And when I listen to that, I sit back and I do the independent research myself. He didn't even link to where those quotes came from. I found it at a different website. And I went and did the research myself. And it turned out she never said or even implied that anything came from Nintendo's projections. In fact, she said those exact words, which she talked about many analysts. She literally used the word analyst. So it was very obvious she was talking about what the outside security groups and analysts were projecting for Switch 2, not about what Nintendo is. And she talked about it from a plural perspective. So basically talking about the whole rather than just Nintendo. So there's no implication there that she was actually talking about Nintendo's own projections. That said, that doesn't mean that that might not be part of the plural and part of the whole. The reality is we just don't know. And this is what I mean when we gather all this information is you have to take a step back. You have to take a step back. Like when I'm looking at information right now, I've now started to shift my mind to, okay, let me look at the whole. And from the whole, let's determine if there's actually negative trends overall going on. Rather than trying to find reasons to debunk negative trends, let me just glance at the whole. And I talked about this on X a little bit where I said in terms of the stock points being made in the one video, well then, yeah, I do agree with them that like the ebbs and flows of a given week don't really matter. Like it being down over the last week or two, it doesn't mean it's not going to bounce back by the end of the month, right? Like that's just what happens. So instead, how about we step back? Let's step back and look at the last 6 months. And it turns out Nintendo's been on a trajectory like this. Even with the recent dip after the Direct, it's still on an upward trajectory. And Nintendo's hit several new peak highs for their stock value over the last 5 months. It's interesting, isn't it? That would show that actually investors, and this is the only thing I can really glean from any of the data, because you can look at like the overall trend of Nintendo stock, and I encourage you to look at it. You can see the peaks happening with the Wii and DS. You can see the peaks happening after Switch launches and then during COVID, and now you're seeing it higher than ever right now during the Switch 2 generation. And there's only really one thing I can conclude from all of those moments in Nintendo's history. Those are moments where investors had a high value and a high belief in what Nintendo was doing, often driven by results, right? It got high during COVID because of results. It got high during the Nintendo Switch after post-launch because of results. And it got high during the Wii and DS because of results. And right now, it was going high before results came in, then results came in, and it went even higher. So I would say the only actual conclusion you can get when you look at the long form from Nintendo stock is not whether or not Switch 2 is going to be successful long haul, but that there is indeed a lot of investor confidence that Switch 2 will. Confidence is just a belief. It does not mean it actually will be successful, right? So that's the only conclusion I can take, taking that long view at the data. So then when you look at confirmation bias and you're talking about whether Switch 2 is going to be successful or not, we literally just don't have enough data. We can bring up whatever points we want, like, oh, there's units on the shelf, so no one's buying it, or, oh, DK Bonanza sales dropped, or, oh, this happened, or that happened. We don't really have the numbers. The last official numbers we got from Nintendo showed really high stuff, but it also was just launch, and that's not enough to determine long-haul success. We don't have the new fiscal quarter details, and we won't until the first week of November. So it's going to be a bit. Yeah, we'll get a smidge of an idea for like North America and the US on the 8th, but we're not going to get real numbers. Again, all the numbers are going to come from Nintendo because they're the ones that have the actual raw data. And of course, you know, I noticed in his recent video that Nintendine, who, if he can't admit that he has confirmation bias, then I would be extremely disappointed. I think he's a very intelligent person. And I do think that he can maybe come to that realization on his own that he definitely has some confirmation bias. He's as objective as he thinks his takes are. When they've been consistently negative, like literally consistently negative since before the Switch 2 came out, at some point you got to admit you have a little bias in there. Just like I can admit I have some positivity bias because I'm actually enjoying the system. And sure, the system doing well would be good for the channel, no doubt. But yeah, I can at least admit that I do have some confirmation bias. I hope that he can too, because I do think he's a smart guy. So as I sit back and I think about this idea of confirmation bias, I extend it beyond obviously just me and Nintendine and other content creators, but I extend it to the way we talk about things online. Confirmation bias is rampant. And I think in having this small discussion video on it, maybe it'll open your mind a little more to your own confirmation biases. As an example, there's going to be fans that love the shit out of me, right? I have some hardcore fans, and there's confirmation bias from you guys that I'm right about everything. I'm not. I can tell you that right now. I'm not right about everything. I could be wrong about things I said in this very video. I'm not right about everything. We run our lives on these small or big confirmation biases. We really do, truly. It's very hard not to have it. And I struggle all the time to try to step back and consider alternative perspectives, but I'm very proud of myself that I'm willing to, that I go into videos like Nintendine's, just as an example, with a bit of an open mind, because I want to actually hear the arguments and see what's being presented. And then I'll take that information, think about it, chew on it, then I'll back out and do my own independent research to kind of see if that information tracks. And right now, it's mostly just circumstantial stuff to push a narrative. And we don't have any evidence one way or another outside of, hey, it was like the biggest launch of all time. Outside of that stuff from Nintendo's first financial report, as of now, September 22nd, 2025, we don't have enough data to come to any actual conclusions. That's where I'm at. So I don't know if Switch 2 is selling well right now. I don't know if it's going to sell well this holiday. I don't know if it's going to, I can tell you my opinions, and I certainly have them, but I don't have data to back them up. I can bring up circumstantial things. I can make the argument for why I think Switch 2 is going to sell well, why I think it's going to hit the 15 million in projections. But all of it is circumstantial. None of it is definitive because we just don't have the data. And I don't think we're going to know data on if Switch 2 is going to be successful, especially long haul, for probably a couple of years. We're going to need a couple of years to let all the sales sort out, let the announcements happen, and just kind of see if momentum of Switch 2 continues. Like, even if it hits 15 million this first fiscal year, that doesn't mean they're going to do 20 million next fiscal year. They could drop down to 8 million. We don't know. That would actually show a massive decline and show there is declining interest, and actually the system is in trouble. So yes, I do think that I can admit to that stuff, but I just need the larger data set rather than the individual monthly circumstantial evidence that just isn't enough to come to these kind of conclusions. That said, you guys let me know what you think about confirmation bias down in the comments below. I am Nathaniel Rogans from Nintendo Prime, and yeah, I'll catch you in that next one.